First, thanks again for being here and letting us screen your print.
Sure.
That was pretty special, I thought.
Good for me too.
Yeah. Maybe just to start, I wanted to hear from you about your initial encounter with David and how you came to be involved with this film. At this point, you'd already shot films by Sam Raimi and Robert Townsend and others, and this is a very interesting moment in Lynch's career. It's following the sort of complicated, let's say, like public response to Wild at Heart and Fire Walk with Me, and even the second season of Twin Peaks. And then, I don't know, maybe something changes with this film. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I had met David. I'd shot 6 episodes of a show he did after Twin Peaks called On the Air, which is sort of a screwball comedy, if you can imagine. It's very funny, actually. And then we did a bunch of commercials and a show for HBO called Hotel Room, which was a trio of stories. And then you just sort of wait, I guess, and then the call comes. And so you're happy the call comes, and, I didn't know what we had in front of us until I read it, but yeah.
Yeah. Did you guys have any conversations towards the beginning about what the kind of visual relationship would be between Lost Highway and the films that preceded it? Yeah.
No, with David, he didn't really like referencing other films. I tried it a little bit in the beginning, and he just said, look, I want this film to look like this film, and I don't want it to look like other films. And of course, we all have subconscious, references in our head that maybe we pull out consciously or not. But for him, it was just about, this is its own thing, and I don't want to bring anything else into it but this.
But one thing that kind of struck me in looking at the film again tonight was that in some ways, it might be the darkest Lynch film up to this point. I don't just mean at the level of what thematics or whatever. I mean literally, it's visually very dark. And I was wondering sort of how you sort of strategize using darkness as a tool in your repertoire.
It's very dark. I was sitting in the back, kind of shocked how dark it was. David kept pushing me to go darker and darker, and there's a limit to technology and where the film will start to fall apart if you get too dark. We definitely breached that a few times, I think, and I sort of came up with a formula for exposing that I knew I would have something more than black the next day. So, yeah, I mean, there's no sort of talk in the beginning about what the visual arc is or anything. I think to a certain extent, David has it in his head, and then on a daily basis, you rehearse the scenes and you sort of react to that photographically, and so he's sort of guiding you without saying anything.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the key, of course, locations in the film, that being the Bill Pullman's character's house, is of course that's David Lynch's real house, and so.
Well, it wasn't at that point.
Wasn't at that point. Okay.
It was his neighbor, elderly gentleman named Chet.
Okay.
Lived there for years, and he had passed away shortly before prep started, and David was friends with his family. David actually wrote the script physically for his own house because he couldn't see the front door from any windows. So when someone rang the doorbell, you had no idea who was there. But he wasn't going to let us shoot in his house, of course. So when this house became available, David bought it, and they changed all the walls on one floor to serve the story. They created that hallway and a bunch of other things. The windows were all very David. And so in a way, we built a set in a real house. We just changed a real house to fit what he wanted.
Yeah. And so if I can move ahead just a little bit, but we're going to stay on Lost Highway. I was wondering then when it came time to make Mulholland Drive, because someone else shot the Straight Story, Freddie Francis.
Freddie Francis. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you came back to the fold for Mulholland Drive, and I mean, maybe I already know the answer to this to some extent, but I was curious if there was any difference, you perceived any difference in approach, sort of when you started to talk to David about Mulholland Drive versus Lost Highway.
Well, the biggest difference, of course, that Mulholland Drive started as a television pilot. So we were forced into a certain format that David probably wouldn't have chosen, but other than that, we treated it like a feature film. There was really no difference in how we talked about shooting it or shooting it. It was never really, oh, this is for television. That was never discussed.
And then of course Twin Peaks: The Return years later, and yeah, I was just curious about the experience of reuniting after those years, and also it's like I think people, especially at the time it was airing, but especially now, I think people talk about The Return as like there's just so many ideas, so many things that people had never seen in a movie or a TV show before, and so on, and this kind of spirit of experimentation that people find very beautiful, myself included. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you guys approached this most recent collaboration.
For the Return? Well, The Return was a huge gargantuan monster, because it wasn't, David didn't write episodes for a TV series. He wrote one massive film that was almost 600 pages. And so it took you 2 or 3 sittings just to read it, and there was no way you were ever going to comprehend it or break it down in a production sense. You just sort of jumped in, and David, having been working on it for 3 years, he had it all in his head. And the only way that we could sort of devise where we were in the story when we were shooting was what the scene number was, because normally you top out at 110 scenes, or this went into the 700s. So, you're shooting, you say, oh, scene 600 something, then you sort of, impart any sort of creative idea you had about, the visuals as the story goes on, knowing that you're on scene 600 something. Yeah.
Well, I want to make sure we leave some time to get some questions from the audience. But I was sort of wondering, your sense of how this film's reputation has kind of changed over the years. At the moment of its release, the response was mixed, I guess we would say. But now,
yeah, David famously made a billboard because Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs down.
Yeah.
And he sort of ran with that.
Yeah, he said 2 more reasons to see the film. But now I think it has sort of ascended to this place where people view it as a very important film for kind of understanding the whole Lynch's whole project. And I was wondering, from your perspective as the guy who shot it, observing it over the years, and how the way that people have talked about it has shifted.
It's hard to say. I mean, it's such a puzzle, whether it's solvable or not. Everyone has their own opinion. I think, because when it first came out, I talked to David after about, I had friends who had gone to see it, and imparted to him what they thought it was about, and everyone had a different idea, and that really made him happy, because I think he didn't want anything tidy in the story. He wanted everyone to interpret it the same way you would when you look at a painting, I think. And whether he knows what the solution is, I'll never know. But, we did ask him some questions along the way and got nothing out of him. I remember, when Bill goes back to the house at the end and says Dick Laurent's dead, he said, David, why don't you just end the film there? And he just looks at you, and that's it. He's like, he's not going to do that. So I think because that's what people would expect, maybe.
All right. I want to ask one more thing, selfishly, which is just what the David Foster Wallace set visit was like.
Yeah, remind me what that was.
Well, because you wrote
You wrote an expose, yeah.
It was for Esquire, I think, and then it was later republished in his book Consider the Lobster. But he visits the set of Lost Highway, and I think he's generally confounded by Lynch, and then he has some weird run-in with Balthazar Getty, I think.
Oh, I don't know the specifics. I already forgot.
Yeah. All right. Let's take some audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We will bring you a microphone. We'll start right there.
Hi. It was an incredible experience watching the film. I'm curious, though, listening to you talk about the experience of interacting with Mr. Lynch and asking him questions. It seems as though it was maybe a mysterious experience to make the film as it was to watch it. At any given point when you were on set making this film, did you just kind of have to let go of trying to understand what was going on, and it was more something that you just had to feel when you were making it?
I'd say 100%. Yeah, I mean, you have total trust in the captain of the ship, and you just trust what you're doing day to day. There's always a few days working with David on a project where you're not quite sure if you're making the film or if you're in it. There was the scene at the end, the love scene in the desert with This Mortal Coil soundtrack, and then a lot of the Rammstein stuff. David had picked those musical numbers before we started shooting. So when we were shooting those scenes, we had a massive sound system on set, just blasting that music. And you're sort of looking around what's going on, But I think it really guided everyone, the crew and the cast, with a mood, when you shoot. So I think it was pretty effective. I mean, I remember in the hallway, I think, of Andy's house when Balthazar's going around, we had a huge speaker right on the dolly. We couldn't even hear each other, when we were shooting.
Let's go right here. One of you, there are two people with their hands up next. They can rock, paper, scissors for the...
I just wanted to ask about a few shots with Patricia, the first being when we see Alice for the first time with that strobing effect, and then the one actually directly
What's the first
behind
one?
you. The one where we see Alice for the first time, where she gets out of the car and sort of that strobing effect, and then the one sort of directly behind you where she's in the motel. What was your approach to that? Was that something that David had always had in mind, or was that something that you had sort of come up with on the day?
Well, I'm not too proud to admit that was a huge mistake. That was actually it was a light that was out of sync with the camera, the shutter on the camera. And when I saw it in dailies, I said, oh dear, we might have to redo that, David. And he, knowing how it was going to fit in the film, he said, no fucking way, he said.
Hi, thank you for this print. This was extraordinary. I think I sort of have two questions. First being about the print. How long has it been since you have screened the print? And then my second question, how did you guys approach the home video footage? Was it you and the camera team, or was it David taking the camera itself? I'm currently, my friend here and I are shooting a film that involves home video footage, so I'm very curious about that.
What was the first part?
How long has it been since this print was screened?
Oh, so I screened it at the end of January in Los Angeles at the American Cinematheque. And before that, it's probably 15 years between the last screening of it. It's probably been screened less than 25 times. But I noticed some soundtrack issues, so it may have to be cleaned, I don't know. And then the second part was, oh yeah. So that was definitely shot with a video camera. Some of the stuff in the video that they got, we put it on the Steadicam and went through the house, and he wanted it to be pretty crappy. And then I thought, we see it on the TV, obviously, and then I thought when he went full frame on it, he just would do that in post. But he didn't want to do that. We filmed it off the monitor on set because he wanted it just to be as crappy as possible, I think, as sort of impressionistic as possible. And that's sort of as low tech as you can get, really.
Thank you. See, two questions. Is there anything you can remember about any of the footage or any of the scenes that were cut out of the movie? I know there were some things like the transformation sequence and some stuff with the girls at the bowling alley and things like that, there's some snippets of, but hasn't even been shown in deleted scenes or anything. Be curious about. And the other thing, the commercials that you did with David, were any of them car commercials?
Yeah, we did a Honda commercial called Mountain Man. But as far as the deleted scenes, yeah, there was a scene in the bowling alley. There was another scene in the house in the beginning with Patricia in the kitchen. And then there was actually a brief courtroom scene with Bill when he was sentenced. And that turned into a voiceover as he was coming down that long stairs. David just pulled the track from that and played it over that shot.
Had a great evening tonight. The one question I have is obviously like late 90s, it's big with the shift to digital, and Lynch was like fervent with adapting to digital later on. Was he talking about it now? I know Lucas was like really pushing the movement ahead. Where did that, and especially with the camcorder, how did it shift into digital? Like, was it prevalent here? Did that happen later?
On Lost Highway, definitely not. He was 100% film. And I don't remember talking about it at all for Mulholland Drive. So it was really after that when other people started doing it and he saw it was, viable. I think it went back to he had a certain desire for DIY filmmaking, which is sort of what happened with Inland Empire. He's very much wore all the hats for most part on that, and that's sort of why he loved digital. And in fact, when we were prepping the return, he wanted to shoot the whole thing on an iPhone, but Showtime said no. But we did end up with a digital documentary camera that was smaller than most because he wanted to just move.
One of my favorite scenes is towards the end. It's the love scene outside, and it seems like it would be really difficult to shoot just because there's dirt that's kind of like being windswept. There's an explosion and such too. Could you talk about filming that scene?
Yeah, so that was one of two scenes in prep that David mentioned to me, and he was very specific about how overexposed he wanted them in front of the car. So we shot some tests in prep, so we had sort of a formula for that. But, and David is, I think, the master of the happy accident. So the first night, that sequence was shot over 2 nights. The first night, it was just windy as hell, and there was nothing we could do about it. And it turned out to be an amazing, atmospheric thing for the film, but it was really difficult to shoot. We had to take the camera inside of a van just to put on a new magazine. And then the next night, we had to get wind machines to try and match it. So it was, so those two things I think really are memorable, part of that scene.
And the polka dots. Or half of a polka dotted shirt.
Hi. Me and my buddies who asked questions over here, and I'm sure many people in the room are very big Twin Peaks fans and very big Return fans, and specifically of episode 8, which features 9 Inch Nails. My question for you is that episode, it stands alone. It's shot mostly in black and white. It features a lot of black and white photography. And I'm curious, knowing that David wrote such an extensive script, not really segmented into episodes in that way, what the conversation was like when you have something like that episode that is so singular from the rest of the show, and kind of how you knew how to approach those scenes if, it was kind of one continuous project.
Well, again, we shot way out of sequence, so I don't know how far apart those scenes were, but I know you'd get there and David, would set up the mood or the scene or whatever the set was. We had a bunch of that stuff in the fireman's house, which was an old theater, and then, the whole frog moth sequence as well. And you're sort of just, you have to just take it with a straight face. You can't sort of, sort of comment on it. You just sort of, okay, so you just treat it as it is. And I was curious, because they were so far apart in their production, when we went to do the color for the show, where all that stuff would end up. And I realized, of course, going through episode by episode, it was all in 8. And even, coloring it with no sound, it was pretty shocking and striking. And yeah, I mean, there's no, again, it's a daily thing. It's not, there's never a discussion of A to Z. It's just, that's all in David's head. So when you get there, he creates the mood of the scene, and you work with that, to bring it to life. Does that answer your question?
Right there.
Do you have a favorite scene or image from Lost Highway?
I really like the very beginning when Bill's going to work and Patricia's standing there and she says she's going to stay home and read. There's something about that scene because we shot it early on, and it just sort of set the tone for the look of the whole movie. And it wasn't, again, anything planned. It just sort of was, David's like, I just want this one light on, and Patricia's going to stand there, and I want Bill to come out of the darkness. And so you sort of accomplish all that, and you look at it, and you just sort of file that in your head as, a guide for the rest of the shoot. And so I look at that scene as more than just a scene, but as sort of a beginning of what the film became.
We have time for one final question.
Hi, this is my first question ever. Thank you so much. This is so beautiful print, and also my love to David Lynch and his work, and also it's one of the best collaboration, I think. I want to ask if you have any advice for beginner filmmakers who are working on film and shooting on film.
Advice for beginning filmmakers?
Beginner or...
Oh, working on celluloid.
Working on film, who is shooting.
With film?
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a tough question. I think you just have to try it little by little. And I think the biggest learning curve is to make mistakes, to push too far and then know what your limits are as far as, the photochemical aspect of it. And then once you know that, then you have your parameters of where you can go. And then just treat it like you would any camera, really.
All right, we have to leave it there because we have another sold-out screening of Lost Highway pretty soon. But Peter, thank you so much, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you.